This is our first lecture on the Elasticity module. This one's going to talk a lot about concepts. We'll worry about the math a little bit later on. The concept of elasticity is that when we apply a force to something, there's a little bit of responsiveness to it. The Elastic Man from the Fantastic Four, he can stretch in whatever direction he wants. He's the only force that he's applying to himself. Here, in economics, we're typically going to look at the force being applied as a change in price, although later on we'll talk about, for example, the income elasticity of demand as well. We want to look at how demand, or occasionally supply, will respond to that change in price. When we say goods have elastic demand, we mean just like something that's very elastic in the real world, if you apply a little bit of force to it, it'll move a lot. So the example that we use here on this slide is that a store owner raises prices and expects that the quantity demanded is going to drop. How much it's going to drop is going to depend on how responsive, how sensitive consumers are to that change in price. Inelastic demand is a case where demand does not change very much with respect to the price changing. So, for example, cigarettes are very inelastically demanded. There's probably nobody listening to this who will change significantly the amount that they smoke based on a small change in price. If you don't smoke, even if I gave you cigarettes for free, you probably wouldn't start smoking them. And if you do smoke, even if I raise the price, you might change, but most smokers won't. The factors that determine a price elasticity of demand are whether there are a lot of substitutes, whether they're luxuries or necessities, whether you spend a large or a small share of the consumer's budget on them, whether it's the short run or the long run, and we have to think about some competitive dynamics there as well. The thing to remember is that for elastic demand, you're going to expect goods to have a lot of substitutes. You're going to expect goods to be luxuries. You're going to expect them to take up a large share of the consumer's budget, and you're going to expect them to be consumed over a long time horizon. Stop for a moment, feel free to pause the video, and think about which of these factors affect each of these goods. Go ahead, pause. I'll wait. For gasoline, that's a necessity. You use it over the very short term. It's not very expensive, and there are very few substitutes. It would be very inelastic. Same thing with college textbooks. You have very few substitutes, so there's probably going to be relatively inelastic demand for them. Coffee, it's addictive. Anything that's addictive is likely to have inelastic demand. Airline tickets, it's going to change depending on whether you're traveling for business or for pleasure. Concert tickets, probably very elastic. Soft drinks, lots of substitutes, going to be very elastic. Medical procedures, though, very inelastic. There's nobody who would turn down a life-saving medical procedure because it's too expensive. The categories that we talk about are unit elastic, perfectly inelastic, in addition to those relatively elastic or inelastic points that we've had before. When a good is unit elastic, that means that the percentage change in quantity demanded is exactly the same as the percentage change in price. Something that's perfectly elastic means that there's an extremely high elasticity. In fact, it's infinite. And the quantity will change by basically the entire amount in response to any change in price. We'll talk about an example of that later on. We'll also have an example of a perfectly inelastic good, where there's not going to be a change in quantity, even if the price does change. Take a moment, take a look at this table. The thing to remember is that once we start computing elasticities, we can refer back to this greater than, equal to, or less than 1 reference. We're also going to see that for any linear demand curve, no matter what, a linear demand curve is always going to be elastic at the top. It's going to have exactly 1 unit elastic point, and then it's going to be inelastic at the bottom. One thing I want to point out here, note that the epsilon symbol, which looks like a little curly E, we use to represent elasticity. There are 2 very strong cases of elasticity. One, we talked about infinitely elastic or perfectly elastic demand. And 2, when elasticity is 0, that's going to be our perfectly inelastic demand. Let's take a look at an example of each. So perfectly elastic demand refers to the horizontal demand curve that we can see here. At any threshold price, below that price, people are willing to purchase any quantity of goods. Above that price, nobody will purchase anything. Think about an example that you might see in your own experience here. Think about the recent change to the price of plastic shopping bags. For a while in Suffolk County, plastic shopping bags were available for free. They had a 0 financial cost, and people took whatever quantity of bags that they needed. They basically had an infinite quantity demanded at that 0 price. However, when the price increased above 0, a lot of people stopped using bags entirely, with the result that a lot of you guys kind of do the walk of shame. You kind of forget your plastic reusable bags and you carry all of your goods out to your car without buying any of the 5-cent plastic bags. Now in Suffolk County, we're seeing that there are even fewer bags available. Plastic bags, I believe it's statewide now, are no longer available. In the case of infinitely inelastic demand, perfectly inelastic demand, where we have a vertical demand curve, we can see that there are goods that are necessities that have no close substitutes. Life-saving prescription drugs like insulin are necessary for some people to live. As a result, nobody is going to try to negotiate the price. They're just going to, as we see in the news right now, pay whatever they need to get a hold of their insulin. The quantity demanded is going to remain the same regardless of price. So these are some of the concepts that we've talked about in elasticity. Make sure that you're comfortable with those concepts and then move on to our second mini lecture, which is going to deal more with the math.